Is this straight? Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. I thought for this video I'd do something a little less scripted, a little more conversational. It's going to be a little bit different. I'll get back to my normal Twitter related content soon, but in the meantime, let me know what you think about this style of video. Today I just wanted to share a little bit about my story, about how and why I ended up as a young indie maker. It may be a little bit all over the place. I got some tea here, but if you're curious as to how I got here or you're considering making this journey yourself, you may find this a little bit interesting. So let's get to it. So the story will start in second grade, which I know is a long time ago, but hear me out. So back when I was in second grade, I think I was maybe 8 at the time, I already had it into my head that I wanted to go to an Ivy League university. Now, I have no idea how I even knew that Ivy League universities existed at the time. Again, I was 8 years old, but somehow I found out about them, and for some reason I decided like that's what I wanted to do with my life. So then we'll fast forward to my junior year of high school. At that time I was doing a lot of different extracurricular activities, both kind of for what I wanted to do, but as well as really bulking up my resume for college applications. And one of the things that I was doing was this program called DECA. And DECA was like this type of business competition for high schoolers. And there were a number of different events that you could compete in. But the one that I competed in was like a 30-page written paper on building a franchise. And the franchise that I decided to write my proposal on was Holiday Inn Express. I don't really know why I picked it. I think when I was thinking about different types of franchises, the idea of a hotel just sounded interesting to me. So I did that project. I ended up doing pretty well. I went to nationals, and at the National DECA convention, kind of going on concurrently with the competition, was this type of convention of sorts with different sorts of booths. There was like a booth for making custom t-shirts, and there are different companies represented. But one of the booths that really caught my interest was Cornell University. They had a booth there, and as you know, going back to like me as an 8-year-old always wanting to go to an Ivy League university in a junior year in high school, that's really when you're at a point where you're trying to apply for those universities. So I decided, it might be a good idea to talk to the rep. So I talked to the rep at the booth and I told him that I was there for DECA and that I was doing my competition based off of a hotel and a little bit more about my proposal. And he told me, hey, if you're interested in hotels, you should check out the hotel school at Cornell. And I asked him, what's that? I had no idea what the hotel school was or anything about that at all. But he let me know that within the Cornell's kind of business school, there were two sides of it. And one of it was the business side more related to hospitality. That was the Cornell School of Hotel Administration, or the hotel school for short. And the more I kind of dug into the hotel school, the more I realized that like, wow, this could really be a place where I belong. There's just so much about the school that really resonated with me and the type of person that I was. So I applied to the school. I got an interview. I actually went to an on-campus interview, so I got to visit the campus. And I remember as soon as I stepped foot into those doors, into the school, the building itself, I immediately fell in love. There was just this vibe to the hotel school that just really resonated with me, that people were so friendly, and we were all united. We were all hoteliers, as they were called. So I ended up being accepted into the school, and I remember coming in on the very first day, very first class, my very first day. It was hotel operations, and my professor, she told us, look to your left, look to your right. These people are not only your peers, not only your classmates, but they're eventually going to be your network. They're going to be your colleagues, so treat them as such. And that kind of set a precedent for what being in the hotel school was going to be like. It was a professional school. We had something every Friday of freshman year called Dean's Distinguished Lecture Series, where all of the hoteliers would get dressed up in suits every single Friday for kind of like a TED Talk, but hospitality business oriented, just for hoteliers. It was a professional school, and the people that I met there, everyone was just so set on their careers. And, hoteliers had a reputation on campus too as being the friendly ones, being the best hosts, being the most fun ones, but also being professional, being the best dressed. And, during that time, I really felt myself trying to go like full send into that idea of what a good hotelier should be. And, as I got more ingrained into the school, I really started looking up to the upperclassmen. And what I really discovered, coming into the hotel school, I thought my dream was to become the general manager of some luxury resort in Vegas. Bright, shiny lights, all of that wealth. But I realized quite soon that hotel operations was not for me. What I realized, which was pretty surprising to me, was that most all of the graduates from the hotel school were not going into hospitality ops, but instead were going into real estate and finance and more industries along those lines. The hot buzzword was investment banking, or everyone wanted to go into investment banking. And, I just kind of hopped on that bandwagon. I wanted to do well. I wanted to have the prestige of going to some place that other people knew of, right? And I wanted to come back to our reunion years later and be able to be proud of where I was. So I started looking for internships within finance. I think I was set, like, this is what I want to do. And it didn't really come out of nowhere. Like, I always did excel in my finance, accounting, and real estate classes. So there was talent there. It just wasn't really something that I was super interested in, but I think I was able to convince myself that I was interested in it enough so that I was able to pursue it. One other thing that I should mention about the hotel school was that internships were huge. I know that internships are pretty big for a lot of different majors and a lot of different universities, but particularly in the hotel school, you needed an internship for every single summer. And if you didn't, you'd be putting yourself behind. So as a freshman, I was kind of in this mad rush to look for an internship for my freshman summer. The thing was that if you looked at the career fair and if you looked at the job boards that we had on campus, most all of the companies that were recruiting there were looking specifically for upperclassmen, so for juniors and seniors in college. And as a freshman, it was very difficult to compete because I didn't really have any significant work experience at that time. I had worked at restaurants, I had worked at hotels, but nothing within finance or accounting or real estate at that point. So what I ended up doing for that first summer internship was actually applying kind of outside of the Cornell community. I targeted back in Denver, Colorado, which is where I'm from. So I was thinking I could go home for the summer, I could work there. And because I was applying kind of outside of that network, the Cornell University name really stood out. And so then even as a freshman, I was able to get an internship at a retail bank here in Colorado. And that was a rotational program, so I did a bunch of different things within kind of the retail banking side of finance. And yeah, that was really my first internship and my first real working experience with finance. And let me tell you, I didn't love it. It was okay. There were other interns there. We had fun. I did very well at the internship, and I poured my heart and my soul into it because that's who I am. I always thought I would be a really good employee because wherever I was at, whether it be a university or a team or a club or a job, I poured my heart and my soul and gave all of my loyalty and all of my energy into that brand. And that's how it was in that internship. I just gave all of who I was into that employer. And even so, I didn't really enjoy the work itself. I thought it was a means to an end and a stepping ladder into eventually getting into a bigger bank. So that was my first year internship. And then at the end of that internship, so the end of my freshman summer, I applied to something called the Early ID program from Citigroup, or you might know part of it as Citibank. And I applied to their Early ID program and I got in. And so that winter of my sophomore year, I was part of this Early ID program with Citi. And in it, there were a couple of workshops, got to speak to a lot of the analysts and seniors who were in Citi, and did a couple of preparation work. And the cool thing about that program was that it was a feeder directly into their internship program. And so upon completion of that program in the winter, I was able to kind of skip a round of the interviews, go directly into a phone screening, and then to the super day. And that super day was held in New York City, and that was in spring. And I did it. I got the job, I got the internship for my junior year. And this may be a little bit confusing, so let me kind of say that again. So spring of my sophomore year, so second year, I interviewed and got an internship for summer of my junior year, so third year. I didn't even know what my internship was going to be in my sophomore year, in that upcoming summer, but I already knew that I had an internship planned for my junior year, for my third year summer, which was amazing. And like that's all I really wanted at that point. I was all about planning. Like every single step of my life needed to be planned. My motto was, a bad plan is better than no plan at all. It kind of came from my chess days when I used to play a lot of chess, and my chess instructor always said a bad plan is better than no plan at all, because at least you have something to do. At least you have some sort of direction to move your pieces in. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. At least you've made some sort of progress and you can pivot along the way. So my plan this entire time was to, again, go to an Ivy League university and then get some sort of good, well-paying, recognized job, and then be able to work my way up through the ranks and then retire and live a good life. That's kind of what I wanted, very secure. And, I was ecstatic that I had that internship for my junior year, especially because they said that it was a pretty good chance of getting a full-time offer from Citi, from their internship program, because they were pretty selective and they're taking their interns. So I knew that I had that internship coming up, but I still had no idea what I was doing for that sophomore summer internship. Again, everyone needed an internship, it was expected, and I was kind of in this mad dash in the springtime, sometime in like March or April, for like, I need to get an internship for the summer. And then I did something that I really have never done before up until that point. I went to a career fair. Now, I really don't like career fairs in general. There's just like, it smells really bad, and people are wearing suits that are way too big for them, and they're like really long lines, and it's really loud and just a really stressful environment. And I much preferred to apply to things online. But again, I was desperate for something for that summer, so I decided to go to a career fair. My intention was to look for some things along the real estate and finance side. But again, I went to a couple of booths and they were mostly looking for upperclassmen, and the lines were just really long to talk to a lot of them. So I was kind of milling around like a chicken with its head cut off in this career fair, pretty overwhelmed, when I saw this table, which was like empty. There was no table skirt, there was no swag on the table. It was just like a bare table and the representative and a laptop. And you know what? I'll go and talk to her. She seems nice. And so I spoke to her, and it turns out that she was a representative for the startup based in Silicon Valley, and they were hiring an intern. And I had never really considered interning at a startup before up until that point. Like, entrepreneurship was something that had never really occurred as something that would be for me. When I thought of entrepreneurs, I thought of like really type A people who would like really aggressively go after everything that they wanted. And that being said, I am pretty type A. I do pretty aggressively go after things that I want. But just the idea that I had in my head of like who was an entrepreneur, who worked at a startup, that really wasn't who I saw myself as. But I had been interested in what startups were like, and I thought, it might be a good idea to get this internship for this summer, or at least apply and see what happens. So I applied, I had an interview with the representative, I had an interview with the CEO of the startup, and we really hit it off, and I ended up getting the job. So that summer, I go from Ithaca, New York, which is where Cornell was, all the way over to Palo Alto, California, for the internship that would change my life. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I learned more in that internship than I did in all 4 years of college. Straight from the very beginning, I was working pretty long hours, but it wasn't the work in the beginning that really set it apart. It was working under the manager that I had. So at that point, I was the 13th hire, and the representative that I met at the career fair was my manager. So I was working directly under her, helping her out with things. And like up until that point, I was a really big people pleaser, right? I didn't want to upset anyone. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. And most of the culture that I had been in was a very professional culture where you kind of go through this chain of command. But that didn't really work at a startup. So there are lots of times, especially in the first couple of weeks, where I needed something from someone else, and I would ping them on Slack and ask them for it, and I'd get no response. And then I just didn't really know what to do after that. But looking up to my manager, seeing what she did, she would bother people. She would keep pinging them, and if they didn't respond, she would get up and walk over to their desk and stand there until they gave her, their attention. And it was just so unlike like anything I had ever experienced before in terms of like getting what you want and being aggressive in pursuing the information that you need in order to be able to do your job. And I just learned so much from her and the way that she interacted with people. Of course, doing it politely, but it just never really occurred to me that someone can be aggressive in going after that sort of information. So let's flash forward to a couple weeks into the internship. I am already working over 40 hours per week. I am apparently having to work on weekends too, which is something that my manager never told me about when I was interviewing for the position, but this was a property management startup. So we had, it was a two-sided marketplace, right? We had our homeowners and we had our renters, and we matched them up and we managed the homes for the homeowners. And because we were so small, one of the responsibilities that I had to end up doing was showing homes on the weekends to potential renters who wanted to rent a place. And so a couple weeks into the internship, gosh, I was having a day. I had somehow ended up injuring my eye. I went to the health center at Stanford, which was nearby. I went to the doctor there. Apparently, I had an abrasion on my eye, and it was watering and it was really painful. And then I had to leave from there to go to a home that I had to show. So I was in professional clothing. I was like watering from one eye, could barely see out of it because it hurt so badly, getting ready to show this home. And I get a call. And the call is from the CEO of the startup. And I talk to him, and he tells me that my manager quit the company. She left. And that because I knew the most about what she was doing, I'd really have to step up in her place. And I went through all of the stages of grief that day. Like, at first I was in denial. I thought like there's no way she left. She was here this morning. She was at her desk, right? There's no way she could have left. Eventually went into anger. She brought me all the way from New York to California in this like completely unknown area. She said that she would take care of me, and now she's like abandoning me. And the day kind of went on, and I remember it was the end of the day. I was waiting at a CVS to pick up some medicine for my eye, and it all just kind of hit me, and I just started crying in one of the aisles at the CVS. And I called my mom, and she's asking like, what's wrong? And I kind of tell her what's going on. Because the thing that really got me, like, I was a pretty confident person at that point. I'd always excelled in anything that I had done up until that point in terms of like classwork and extracurriculars. But even with that level of self-efficacy, I thought I was going to fail. Like, I was already working, like I said, over 40 hours per week. I was already what I felt like was at my limit. And I really, really, really did not believe that I could push myself any further. Like, I thought, that's it, I'm done. They're going to put all this responsibility on me, and I'm going to fail, and the company's going to fail. And all of the friends that I've made there, they're all going to be without jobs because I suck. And that's like legitimately what was going on in my head. So I was like crying in the CVS, waiting for some medicine for my eye, and I'm calling my mom. And she's doing her best to calm me down. And I think eventually I get to this like begrudging acceptance that, you know what, I'm going to fail and everyone's going to be jobless, but I guess it's going to be okay because there's nothing that I can do about it. I'll just do my best. So come into work the next day, and that's really when Belong broke me. And that's why this was such a life-changing internship, because I had never really done things up to that point that I really thought I would fail at, right? I usually just did things that I was pretty confident that I'd succeed at. And this was the one thing, I guess, that was thrown at me that I really thought I would fail. So there's this sink or swim moment, and it broke down all the expectations that I had of myself and kind of rebuilt this new idea of what I was capable of. I ended up leading and training our remote team based in the Philippines. I took over all of the accounts, again, two-sided marketplace, homeowners and residents. I took over all of the accounts of all of the residents there. And gosh, it was insane. I was the first to arrive at the office and the last to leave the office. I had to fire someone, which I did not do very well. I had to handle rent negotiations between homeowners and renters. I had to deal with late payments or non-payments from renters. I had to deal with a homeowners association trying to send us to court. And it was just unlike anything I had ever done before. The responsibility that I had and the trust that everyone had in me in order to do my job as a 20-year-old was just unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I would have a brand new idea and I would take it to the CEO and I'd say, hey, we should do this. And he says, great, do it. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I guess let's figure out how to do this thing. And it just went on for the summer and it was incredible. And at the end of the summer, actually, the CEO ended up bribing me to have to stay for another 2 weeks because they had to hire 4 temps to come to replace me. And so I trained them all for 2 weeks. And then I was back to New York. And I actually, again, this kind of goes back to like my loyalty to brands. So much of who I was at that point was just shaped by working at that startup that I didn't want to quit. So I ended up working for them remotely during the school year as a kind of a training function, and then came back again to work for them in person over the winter. And throughout all of this too, because everyone at the startup knew that I was going to be working for Citi the next summer, and the founding team and lots of other people were telling me, don't go to Citi. Stay with us for this next summer. You won't like it over there. You know who you are. You love being working at startups. Like, you are not going to be happy in a corporate finance world. And it got to the point where I was seriously considering rescinding my acceptance to the Citi internship and working for Belong instead for that upcoming summer, because, that's where my friends were. And I was just treated like an equal there. I wasn't treated like an intern. I was treated like a full-time employee. And I was seriously considering just staying with the startup. But eventually I decided that for me at that time, I had done Belong and I had loved it and I had experienced it. And I felt like if I came back for another summer, it would be a lot of the same. And I wanted to expose myself to this other side of the world and really understand what that part was like. So I did decide to continue with my internship with Citi, and that's when COVID hit. So the internship that was supposed to last for an entire summer and be, at their headquarters in New York ended up only being a truncated program, and it was fully remote. That being said, I'm still incredibly grateful that I was even able to have that experience, because so many of my friends during that time, their internships were straight up canceled because of COVID and the companies not being able to handle it. So I had the remote internship with Citi, and again, I didn't love it. The people were really nice. The company culture was really, really nice, but my scope of work, like what I was actually doing, was just very dry. It was a lot of number crunching. It was a lot of being in Excel. And that's kind of what the corporate finance ladder was, right? You'd start off as, an analyst, then maybe work your way up to an associate. And then your work would change as you climbed each rung of the ladder, but you'd have to go through all of those steps. And it just wasn't fun. It wasn't fulfilling. And I felt like I was capable of doing so much more. But that was my dream, right? That was everything that I'd ever wanted, was to be at a point where I had a solid job in a name recognized brand and have lots of opportunity to move upward, right? That's what I wanted. I was getting paid well. The benefits were great. And, I had a return offer at the end of the internship to return full time. And at that point, the startup also reached out to me and said that they wanted me to come back to them full time after I graduated in some sort of role related to product, which I was super interested in. In fact, they even offered to create this brand new position that would work well for me to fit into their company at that time. So I went back and forth between like, do I want to return to City full time or do I want to return to the startup full time? And I had no idea. They were just so different. And I tried to think about like what I wanted my life to look like in the future. I could see it going both ways. I could see myself, working at the startup for a year or two and kind of breaking into product and being able to maybe go to like another startup at that point. So I could see the benefit of doing that, and I would have fun. I would like be with people that I knew. I would help grow this company. At that point, they were, almost 100 people, and I had joined when I was the 13th employee. So it's like being able to see all these different stages of a startup, and they were raising their Series C, and just knowing what that was like in intimate detail. But on the other hand, there was City, and the people were great, and I could just very clearly see this ladder that I could climb to be able to get to the next place, the next place, the next place. The pay was great, and it was very stable, and I just didn't really know what I was going to do. So I thought about it, and eventually I decided to return to City, which seems kind of surprising in retrospect, knowing who I am. It's odd that I chose City, but there were a couple of reasons why I decided to go that way. One of them was that we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I had no idea how much longer it was going to be going on for, or how much worse it was going to get. And being in that time and being so uncertain about where the economy was going in the future, placing my bets with a company like City that I knew would be able to take care of me versus something like Belong, which I didn't know if they were going to crash and burn in a month because COVID was getting worse and people were all moving out of California to go other places. I just really didn't know. And so that safety aspect during specifically that pandemic time was one of the reasons why I wanted to return to City. I think the other big thing that went into that decision as well was the startup was different from the one that I remembered. There's a big difference between a Series A 15-person startup and a Series C 100-person startup. The culture was different, the people were different, and a lot of the magic that I had experienced when I was first there was kind of dwindling off, and it just didn't appeal to me as much as it did in the super early stages. So for kind of those two reasons, I ended up returning to City full-time. So I graduated college a semester early, so in December instead of in August, which meant that I had a full kind of semester's worth of time to myself before starting work at City. And I actually pushed my start date with City up a couple of months. So instead of starting in July, which was when our start date was supposed to be, I would actually start in early April. But I still had a couple of months, right, between December and April to do something. I think the original plan of graduating early was to travel, but again, with the pandemic going on, that wasn't really feasible. So I started thinking, okay, what am I going to do during this time? I couldn't just do nothing. That's not who I am. I can't just do nothing. And I had a friend who was a dev at the startup, and we had worked together, and he had actually moved to Denver recently to start his own startup with a roommate of his. But then the roommate ended up leaving the startup, and so my friend and I were having a conversation one day. We were taking a walk, and he was kind of asking me, like, how can I find another co-founder? Where can I do this? Because he really didn't want to do it alone. And we were talking, and I told him, if you're looking for a co-founder, I actually have an idea for the startup, and I want to bring you on board. And I had never considered doing that before in my life. Like being an entrepreneur, even like working at a startup, that was fun. But why would I do one myself? I think it was just because I was really bored. I really wanted to do something. And I thought, this could be something fun to do. And the idea that I'd been sitting on it for a couple of months. It was within the senior care industry. So my friend and I had a call. We already knew each other. We were already friends. We already kind of knew how we worked. And we decided to go for it. And that's when Vivi was born. And that was my first time being a founder, if you could even call it that. I learned all about lean startup. I learned so much about idea validation and about pivoting. I did user interview after user interview after user interview. My co-founder at the time also told me to join Twitter because he said that it could help me professionally. I made a Twitter. Didn't really know what I was doing, didn't really connect with anyone through that at all. But we were making progress. And so we started in late December. And then in early March, I decided to quit. And the reason why I quit was threefold. First, that industry just did not bring me joy. I was talking to so many potential users. Every day I was flooded with these heartbreaking and devastating stories of parents aging and of dementia and death. And I consider myself a pretty empathetic person, in just the months and months of just being overwhelmed by this grief. It took a toll. And it came to the point where I started to dread speaking to users because I just felt like I couldn't handle it anymore. So that was the first reason. The second reason was that in order to even get off of the ground, we really did need VC funding. And prior to that point, I thought all startups needed VC funding. I had never even heard of the word bootstrap. But through this process, I realized that if I were to start my own company, I wanted to do something that I could bootstrap for a while first. I did not want VC funding. And maybe I could talk about the reasons why in some other video. But that was reason number 2. And reason number 3 was that I really didn't think that I was the best person to be starting that startup. I thought that the idea had a lot of potential and that with the right person and the right team, it could really change the world. But I really did not believe that I was the right person for it. It did not align with my strengths. It did not align with my unique skill set. It just didn't. So for those reasons, I decided to quit. I didn't do so in a very good way. I kind of botched it with that co-founder. I wasn't able to clearly explain why. I think I was confused at that point, only kind of realized the reasons why later. So we had a falling out. It was kind of a mess, but we're good now. We patched things up and we're friends again. But yeah, that was a rough experience there. So that was early March. And then for all of 2 days, I was sitting on my hands thinking, what do I do now? Right? Because all of my time up and through those months were spent working on Vivi. And now that I didn't have Vivi anymore, I didn't know what to do. And of course, I couldn't just do nothing. So I started thinking, okay, I wasn't uniquely qualified to be doing that startup. So let's start a new one. Let's do something new. And for 2 days, I started thinking about potential ideas that I could run away with and start working on. And what I did, I made a list of my own unique skill sets and the things that I knew more about than the average person and kind of seeing where they connected. And that's when I fell into the idea of connecting students, college students, with internships at startups, because I was a recently graduated college student and I was intimately familiar with the workings behind interning at a startup. And I thought, you know what? I'll connect students with internships at startups because I know that this is something that a lot of students struggle with. Whenever I spoke to students at college, I would always recommend that they intern at a startup. And whenever I did, I'd get them super on board. And then they'd ask me, how can I find an internship at a startup? I wouldn't be able to give them an answer because there wasn't really a lot of good solutions. So I thought, you know what? I'll make a solution myself. That being said, I didn't really think that I could do it alone. I thought that I really needed dev support. So I talked to this friend of mine who's also a dev at a startup that I used to work for, and I kind of pitched him the idea of working on Tenderfoot as a side project. Now, I would do the majority of the work and he just kind of helped with the dev stuff. And he agreed. And so Tenderfoot was born. And we started working on that, and at that point, again, early March, I decided to pivot my Twitter account. I wasn't really using it for anything anyway. I was trying to get into senior care connections with Vivi, but it was not really working. So I completely pivoted my Twitter account. At that point, I had maybe just over 100 followers on Twitter, and in 1 month, I got over 1,000 followers on Twitter. And I'll talk about my Twitter journey in some other video, but at that point it became pretty clear to me that Twitter was going to become my greatest business asset. And then in early April, my work with City started, and that was my full-time work. And I started early, so the rest of kind of my analyst cohort would start in mid-July, but this was in early April. And I worked for a couple of months there, and I really tried to be interested. I really did. Like, I thought that that would be my job and I would do Tenderfoot on the side, but I felt myself thinking about Tenderfoot all of the time, you know, in the shower, during meetings, like any time that I could, I would think about Tenderfoot or Twitter. And I really could not get interested in the work that I was doing. And not only that, but I felt stifled by that work. I felt like most of my skills and what I was really good at, my strengths, did not align with the work that I was doing and the work that I was being given. It just didn't. So I started thinking, why am I even here if I feel stifled, if I feel like I can't do work to my full potential, if I can't provide as much value as I possibly can into this world? So I ended up quitting my job at City. And if you're more curious into kind of my reasoning behind quitting my job and kind of what was going on through my head during that time, there's other video somewhere that you can look at that kind of details that sort of decision. So yeah, that's when I quit my job in July and decided to give myself 1 year to see how I could do working for myself, maybe doing some freelancing, working on Tenderfoot, doing what I can within this self-employment and creator space. And I'm a couple months into it so far. I'm making this video in the end of September. So I quit in mid-July and this is now end of September. And it's been so much fun. We're making progress on Tenderfoot. I actually ended up finding a new co-founder for that, and that's this whole other story that I'll get to some other time, but things are going really well with that. I've somehow fallen into creating custom Twitter banners for people, which people actually really love. I'm going to create an NFT collection of banners sometime soon. I'm working on creating an online course, and I actually just as of today signed a contract to do some freelancing work in social media, mostly with Twitter and LinkedIn, for a startup. So it's just been so great. I look forward to getting up and going to my laptop and getting work done every single morning. I have this amazing work-life balance where I can kind of work between doing things that can make me money, but also going out with friends and hanging out with family and doing things that bring me joy and exercising and eating well. And this is the happiest that I've ever been in my life. And yeah, I guess that's the story of how I got into this place. This is by no means the end of that story. There's still so much time left to go in this year, and obviously I'll keep you all updated with whatever ends up happening. If that's something that you're interested in, just let me know. And if you have any questions about any part of this, and I know it was super rambly, I know it went on for a while, probably gave you way too much more than you ever wanted to know. I don't even know if anyone will make it to the end of this video, considering how long that's probably going to be. But yeah, if you have any questions, or if you're considering, taking the dive yourself into becoming a full-time creator, let me know. I'd be happy to answer questions or give you support or really anything else. So yeah, I know this wasn't a typical video of mine. Again, I'll go into the more compact, value-added Twitter pieces later, but if you liked this rambly style of video, let me know. I can maybe do a couple more conversational pieces in between. But yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later.